Good morning, afternoon, or evening, friend. I have the one, the only, the infamous Reverend Brandan Robertson. Brandan is a noted author, activist, public theologian, dedicated to exploring the intricate connections between spirituality, sexuality, and social renewal. He serves as the pastor of Sunnyside Reformed Church in New York City, also known as the TikTok pastor. I'm interested to know more about that. He's a vast digital reach of over 215,000 followers, 5.5 million views, engaging his inclusive theological digital content. This guy's bio is like a mile long, 20 books. He's Times, human rights campaigns. He's just like making it rain, love over fear. I could talk for an hour just about all the things that he's done and he's accomplished. I'm so honored and blessed that he's here to share, not just with me, but with my little microcosm community, Men Who Shine, and the men at large, the women at large, the people at large, the humanity at large. And I'm so honored to have you here, Brandan. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation and the community that you're curating. It's incredible.
Yeah, same to you. I know when I was just bouncing around, kind of in the flow, I think I don't even know when I first reached out to you, but something about, well, number one, your last name, because my mother worked for televangelist Pat Robertson for
Yeah.
23 years. Moment of silence, smoke an imaginary cigarette. Whew, for
What's
that.
unfortunate is that people say I have, and this is true, a slight resemblance to that Robertson family. And so it's very confusing to people. We've got the big ears. Pat Robertson had huge ears. So,
Okay, okay.
yeah,
Well, what I've
yeah.
noticed in my personal journey with reconciling my religious upbringing, my faith, with the faith of my mother's,
Mm,
right, and her belief system, and this notion of love winning,
mm.
right, coming into the queer community 10, 11 years ago, well, 47 years ago if you want to be exact. I was born, baby, I was born this way. uh,
Amen.
Amen. So one thing that I've noticed in my journey in reconciling my relationship with myself, with the father energy, all these spiritual components, and the mother energy, as my mom has, been this space of love and also a space of friction for
Mm,
me in her, her little bubble.
yeah,
And what I've, the conversations that she and I have had around, applying the principles of Christ to the Christian community, to those who claim to follow God as they perceive God. I personally have identified much more with the Christ character since leaving the fold of that conservatism, evangelicalism, Christian nationalism, whatever you want to call it, that I see it's not the Christ consciousness to me. It's not this love your neighbor, judge not lest you be judged, blah, blah, blah. And so ironically, I have had to um, really apply the teachings and the heart of Christ to the Christians in my
yeah,
life. So
yes.
what what has what has occurred in your experience to really get to the space where you are actively contributing your life in such a way that you are forwarding this love wins type of gay agenda, I'll call it. Yet, you know what I'm saying? It's like a
Yeah,
lot of us in the queer community are not really, really, really digging deep into what that means and applying it to those that have hurt us.
yeah.
So what's coming up for you?
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, everything you said is also resonant with my experience. I think the big thing that people, Christians, don't realize is that Jesus wasn't one of them. And none of the New Testament, nobody in the New Testament was a Christian. Everybody was a first century Jew. And so it's pretty ironic, but also not ironic at all, that Christianity has created a version of this person who existed 2,000 years ago that is a Christian, that is a nationalist, that does believe their theology and promote their perspective, but it's not at all the actual Jesus that existed. It's not actually the Jesus you find in the New Testament. And that was my journey of coming out of conservative evangelical, raised in mega churches, and really during my 4 years studying at a evangelical college, I kept bumping into this realization that the deeper I went into the study of the Bible and the history of Christianity, the more I realized that Christianity wasn't a thing that is in the Bible that was represented by the person of Jesus, that there was a deep chasm between those who call themselves Christians and the Christ that actually exists in the pages of the New Testament, and the one that I think most of those who call themselves Christians experience what I believe is Christ, but you can call it whatever you might want to call it. But that person, that thing, that force that they encounter is real. But after that encounter, it becomes entrenched in, as you said, a theology of fear. Um, and it makes sense that that happens. If you want to create a successful religion, a successful political campaign, a successful anything in our broken, fallen world, use fear and you'll do it. You'll get authority, you'll get power, you'll have wealth and privilege. And that's what Christianity has become. And it became my mission after experiencing that. And we can get more into the stories about how I experienced those things. But my mission today is to kind of be um, somebody from within the institution of Christianity that is trying to rupture the systems and structures that have been used to harm the LGBT community, among many other communities, by constantly calling us back to the true message of Christ, which contradicts our theology, which contradicts our practice, which calls us to repent of being Christians the way that we have for 2,000 years. And it's been beautiful to see so many queer people over the course of the last decade of doing this work be able to come back and say, actually, I've always had a thing for Jesus, but could never get on board because of Christianity. But they're finding a new way of being Christian, not just because of me, but because we're in a moment where there are so many inclusive Christian voices rising up with the same sense of calling.
Yeah, I love what you said. We have a thing for Jesus.
Yeah, totally. He's
Uh,
a hard not to like a guy who says, love your neighbor as yourself and went around healing people. So
yeah, especially one who traveled the world for 3 years with 12 dudes. I mean, what's not to
sounds
love?
ideal. Yes. Yes.
So, with that said, how have you noticed this notion of, I guess, puritanical narrative, a puritanical lens for our sexual expression and our sexuality and these rules and constructs? And what I like to say is the Old Testament God. You know, I tend to look at scripture through the lens of metaphor. I understand there's value in a literal interpretation, and where I'm at right now in my journey in my space is I know we're like the metaphor.
I thought I muted it, but sorry about that.
No, we're all human, right?
Yes. Yes.
So how, in this there's this tension around this performance based, what I call Old Testament ego-centric version. And I look at it like, okay, we're all kind of here to realize our sonship or our heirship to God, realize that we are a part of it. We are one, just as Christ is one. And as we realize we're one, then it's like, oh, we kind of save ourselves from ourselves the way that Christ did. And so the way that I've done that is through that metaphoric interpretation, this Old Testament God that's the ego, that's fear-based, that's judgmental, wrathful, angry, all these things that don't necessarily serve what I feel is the higher Christ consciousness. So through that lens, I look at our sexual expression and our sexual repression as another part of that old construct of fear and control. So
Yes.
what in your experience have you found of the Christ conscious, this elevated love message? How does it apply to our sexual expression and our sexuality as part of the queer community?
Yeah, I think the way you talk about the Bible, in many ways, is exactly right. I think the Bible is a diary of thousands of people over thousands of years, unfolding their own consciousness, understanding morality in new and evolving ways, understanding God in new and evolving ways. And for me, what's actually been really helpful is you're going to hear me keep saying, going back to the Jewish perspective. Again, every part of the Bible was written from Jewish folks. And if you actually look at how modern day Jewish people use the Bible, a majority of them are progressive and metaphorical and have very expansive and ethical ways of using the Bible. And it's ironic that Christians are the ones who've taken this book, which isn't ours to begin with, and really we muddled it up, messed it up, turned it into something it wasn't. All throughout the entirety of the Bible, there is a consistent trajectory towards radical inclusion. Even in the Old Testament, we have these visions of a day that is coming where all flesh is equal and all people are freed to be who God intended them to be and all war ceases. That that runs through the entirety of the Bible. And when it comes to sexuality, it's really ignorance that has created the homophobic, transphobic theology that exists today, and then the broader sexual ethics of kind of purity culture that exists. I'm in a PhD program right now studying the Bible because I've continually grown to love the Bible and been more amazed every layer I go deeper into studying the culture, the context, the archaeology, the language. The Bible becomes a more expansive book. It becomes a more progressive book. It is a progressive book written by a marginalized people for the sake of their liberation. That's what the Bible is.
Mm.
And when it comes to sexuality, like when you go to the book of Leviticus, you can pull out a verse that says, "A man shall not lie with a man as with a woman, for this is an abomination." And that sounds like a condemnation of gay sex. But if you look at it in the context, if you read the entire chapter 18 of Leviticus, where that verse comes from, you quickly see that what's actually happening here is the ancient Hebrew people trying to make themselves distinct from cultures around them that were doing harmful things. In the ancient Egyptian and Canaanite culture, it was permissible for men to rape their male slaves as a sign of domination. Slaves were seen as less than human. This goes all the way through the Greco-Roman world of the New Testament when Paul's writing about sexuality. So the context of sex in the world around the people who are writing the Bible is unhealthy, harmful, abusive. And it's in that context that the writer of Leviticus says, hey, men, stop having sex with men, not two committed men entering into a relationship. That wasn't something happening in that culture. What was happening was men raping other men. And the writer of Leviticus is saying, stop it. That is not what God wants us to do. That is not who we're called to be. That little level of contextualization changes the Bible into a much more moral and ethical document. I can get on board with a man shall not lie with a man as with a woman if we're talking about men sexually abusing one another. Um, and then the more I kept digging, you find things like there's not a verse from Genesis to Revelation that actually condemns premarital sex. And yet that's one of the core verses or core ideas that comes from conservative Christianity. And again, it is based off of a 16th century misinterpretation of a word in Greek called porneia, which refers to prostitution virtually throughout all literature. And yet, in England in the Middle Ages, they made that about premarital sex, fornication is how they translated it, which is not what it was talking about at all. And if you read sex in the Bible, people are having all sorts of wild and strange relationship configurations, and it's never really a problem. So that's my Bible nerd side of this. Like that, the more I've studied this, the more I realize like we've just gotten this wrong. It's not me trying to rescue the Bible. I'm not interested in rescuing the Bible, but I am interested in calling out the people that have misused the Bible and continue to do so to oppress us, to cause us to repress our sexualities, because that's not what I believe God wants for us. It's not what's psychologically healthy, and there's no basis in our biblical texts for it.
Yes. I know we could probably talk for like 3 hours just on the clobber passages alone.
Yeah.
And one thing that I've noticed as it really contributes to this construct of marginalization that Christ actually came to eradicate through his love. So, a lot of the times I feel like, the story of the Good Samaritan, the Christian, there's like various organizations that are, kind of use it as a brand in a way, or various, fundraising events, or, all these things that we need to serve our fellow person who's beaten on the side of the road. And typically it applies to, obviously we need to help all of our humans in need, right? And so if we see someone who's hungry, feed them. We know this is how we actually serve. That's the real way that we serve Christ, is through serving one another and helping one another and all these things. So in and of itself, the way that the majority of the church is interpreting that passage is not bad. However, how I see it now is the LGBT community is being beaten up, bruised, and marginalized. And the person who, it was like the priest who had to come around and kind of say it did not matter so much what the community said, what the religion said. This person was unclean. I can't touch this person. I can't. Nothing mattered more than helping that individual. So,
Yeah.
a lot of times it's like, yes, I see the church is missing an opportunity to actually fulfill the message of Christ in helping and healing and picking up the marginalized, the beaten, the battered, the bruised. And I also see we have come so far through the number of churches who have become affirming and gone, they're on their own trajectory. And for my own personal trajectory with my relationship with my mom, as she worked with a prominent televangelist, and my experience going to Liberty University and all these things, it's very easy for me to sit on the side of judgment, because it's like I'm laying on the ground and like, how dare you beat me? How dare you beat me? How dare you don't help me up? It's all your fault, and da 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 da. So
Yeah.
it takes a very, a practice to be that space of love, to almost like, how do we love the people who are beating us up, I guess, is my question.
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard, right? And I think I've talked about this recently. I've experienced this a lot since moving to New York City a year ago. Dating, right, was the first time in my experience when going out on dates in New York City with other queer folks. Um, Many times over the past year, I've just mentioned I'm a Christian or that I'm a pastor, and the response is immediately, I can't have anything to do with you. I don't want anything to do with you, because while queer people are really there's a lot of resource out there for us to do work around all sorts of shame and all sorts of trauma. Religious trauma is not something very many of us actually take time to actually unpack. And my goal as a queer Christian and a pastor is not, I have no interest in making more queer people Christians. I don't care if queer people ever go back to church. Like, that's not my point. Like, I've had my own on and off again relationship with Christianity and the church. But I do want all queer people to recognize that spirituality is important. Statistics show that queer people, on average, identify as more religious than the rest of the population. That's a Pew poll that came out in 2011 that I've been quoting ever since then, that
Wow.
showed every demographic was decreasing in religious affiliation in the United States, but the LGBT community continued to increase. There is space for us now. Today, a majority of Protestant denominations in the United States are open and affirming. That's something most people don't even realize. And they don't have any reason to realize that because they've been hurt by the church. But my invitation is to say, at least be willing to re engage the stuff that hurt you, re examine the people that hurt you and where they were coming from, not because we want to get them off the hook, but unless we're willing to understand what was driving them, then we're going to also miss the actual damage that's been done in us. And what I mean is this: fear versus love again.
Yeah.
Your mom, for instance, I don't know the whole story, but we'll use this as a metaphor. Coming from a conservative Christian background, right? The theology she inherited was one of fear. It was one that said, my gay son will burn in hell. Okay, that's terrible to hear as a queer son. And if she actually believed that, there's also such anguish within her own soul because she's between a rock and a hard place. She's between eternal damnation and her son. And it's not to say any non-affirming parent should just be off the hook for the terrible things they might have said based on their religion, but it's to say, oh, I can understand that my parent was racked with fear and really thought God was going to damn me to hell. That changes how I relate to them a little bit because it's actually at some strange convoluted level a deep care on their part that led them to be so ghastly towards me. Again, it doesn't absolve them, but it also then opens up, where did I inherit fear from that? Like, am I now demonizing religion and religious people in the same way that they were demonizing me? Am I just continuing this cycle? And is there a different way that I could be freer and more healthy if I do the work to undo this religious trauma? And I invite queer people to do that. I lead courses with a therapist twice a year where we take people on 6 months journeys through their religious trauma. And it's just incredible to see how much opens up for queer people when they have space to dig into that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. And I've noticed this, this concept of loving our enemies,
Mm.
taking that concept internal.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is the internal thoughts, ideas, constructs, stories, narratives that are against us, that are holding us down, that are really against love, period.
Yep.
Right. And so, my mother actually, slash ironically, has been an amazing space of love
Mm.
and acceptance, and just moving out of judgment in general, and it's like a little game of ping pong in a
Yeah.
way. She got rebaptized. She's been a Christian for, I don't know, 50 years, maybe a long time.
Yeah.
And her first baptism was very lackluster. Nobody supported her. My dad at the time, I think they were dating or just engaged. I don't know what the story, whatever the reason was, it was traumatizing to her in some way, shape, or form. So she wanted to rewrite that experience for herself.
Mm.
It's just someone in my space. I'm all about, yeah, rewrite that shit all day long,
Yeah.
just reframe the narrative, tell a new story. And moving from this space of me, myself, wanting to be, moving from a community where I'm tolerated to a community where I'm celebrated.
Yeah.
And that's been the what where I get excited for, people like yourself, churches like we're moving into this affirming, loving, let God be God kind of thing. Judge not, lest we be judged. We're not here to judge and point and condemn and all these things. And so as I turned around my internal narrative around my own enemies against love and saying, oh, I wish my mom did this, or I wish my mom was more an advocate. Why can't my mom be the one handing out free hugs at
Yeah.
the Pride Parade and da da da? And that's just not love
Mm.
for me
Yeah.
to be that
Yeah.
way to her.
Yeah.
For me, then I'm the one putting conditions on love. you
Yeah.
know I'm the one who's saying she
Yeah.
needs to be different in order for her to be lovable, in so much as experience the love in my heart to give her, which is the unconditional love. And so it was a beautiful, that's what I mean when I say ping pong
Yeah.
of what, mom, I'm going to be an advocate for you. I'm going to
Mm.
celebrate you. I'm not going to say, and I think this is a large reason why, like, we do the work, my therapist, all the coaching, the moving, unpacking all the trauma to get to the point where I'm not having a panic attack going into a Southern Baptist, literally Southern Baptist church, to watch my mom, and just be there to
Yeah.
support. I'm there to support and love, not judge. I'm here to celebrate you. I'm going to lay down my, ping pong paddle of right, wrong. Look what you did to me,
Yeah.
and just love. So,
Totally.
yeah. So where, I
Yeah.
mean, I feel like we as a queer community are here to shine the light. My father died like 5 years ago. I have a whole thing on him, but one of the things that he did years before that was he sent this God loves you a little sticker, and it was like rainbow thing. And so when I
Yeah.
called, and my dad's he went to Dallas Baptist Theological Seminary.
Yeah.
He was a lieutenant colonel in the Marines. So that's a
Very conservative.
that's a whole thing. He's
Yeah.
the OT dad, right? He is OT to the core. And when I got it, and then the next time I talked to him, I was like, "Oh, Dad, was this your homage to the LGBT community?" And it totally, like, it was just accidental that he sent that to me. And so he's like, "Oh, I forgot that the LGBTs hijacked the rainbow."
I love that. I love that. But I
So
think what you're saying,
yeah, so here's, not to interrupt if you had something that come
yeah.
up. So this, obviously we're not hijacking the rainbow,
Yeah.
and we kind of sort of are, because I feel like we have this grander story message of love to
Yes.
to to transcend. And where we're at right now is it takes transcending those narratives and those constructs and those fears from the exact community.
Mm.
That's the last thing we want to do is love. I want to love my dad for, all this shit. I want to
Yeah.
love all this stuff for being in this, so what have you found, or what would you say is the best thing to advice, or how do we transcend, either personally or on a community level, the ease at which it's so easy to judge the
Yeah.
people who harm us, and that's not the message of love. If we are really truly committed to loving, and loving winning,
Yeah.
um what next, Brandan?
Yeah. No, there's so much good stuff there. I think three things came to my mind. First, we forget what moment of history that we're living in. And this is something really important for us as queer people. So much change has happened in the past 50 years, in particular for the queer community. But we are, this generation, those of us alive now, we are the ones that are actually making the transition where we are seeing society fully tip towards full LGBT inclusion. And there's still a lot of work to be done, but that should give us great reason to be hopeful, but also give us a lot of grace and help us remember where we're at. Because it is almost impossible to conceive of your parents in their generation being fully LGBT inclusive just because the vast majority of people were not fully LGBT inclusive. And so it's easy for us to look back and judge our parents and pastors and those types of people being like, why can't you be where we are today? But it's like 30 years ago, the world was different. And so we can't expect the past to look like the present. And the way you change people's hearts and minds, and I learned this early on, as soon as I came out, I got rejected, not just by my own church communities, but it was a very public coming out. I got outed in Time magazine, and the next day, the Southern Baptist Convention went crazy about this guy who was a rising evangelical that is now a heretic. And I immediately started getting invited to do public debates. And I thought, I'm going to go into these spaces and I'm going to give them the biblical arguments and I'm going to show that I'm a Christian and they're going to change their minds. And I wasted so much energy and put myself through so much trauma trying to debate people into change. What
Yeah.
changes hearts and minds is letting your own light shine, and other people will see you, and they will still see your parents will see you being a healthy, whole, vibrant human being. And even if they never come to the cognitive place where they say, I understand that the Bible doesn't condemn you, they still believe traditional theology, it's your witness, your willingness to be loving, your willingness to keep showing up. That is actually what changes hearts and minds. And
Yes.
I understand queer people that want to cut off their families. And for some people, that's a healthy decision. But for a lot of us, just because our families have different views on who we are and might not support us in our flourishing, if we can find a way and do the work to be healed enough that we can relate to people in our lives that reject us or marginalize us with love, with joy, without bringing up the topics that we need to debate all the time, that will transform them way faster than us standing on the outside and saying, you all are backwards bigots and I want nothing to do with you. Like that's necessary in some places, but it is not a path to actually change people's hearts and minds. And the last thing I'll say, you brought up the language of transcend. My mentor, there's this guy, Ken Wilber, who's this philosopher, and he coined the phrase transcend and include. And the way he got to that phrase was by looking at all the psychological growth models of human history. He has a book called A Brief History of Everything. It's brilliant. But what he found in all of the psychology models of how you grow and evolve spiritually and psychologically is not just transcending, not just moving beyond what you were, where you're coming from, but also including. And that's a part that people miss. Every stage of your growth, even the conservative Christian part of you growing up, gave you something that helped move you towards the next level. And far too often, when we move to a new stage, we demonize that which was behind us and say it's all
Mm.
messed up, it's all backwards. And we miss the gift that would actually make us a more mature, more healthy, more stable person. And so, my invitation to queer folks that I'm working with on spiritual trauma is like, let's actually go back and make space to find what was good from
Mm.
that very traumatic period of your life. The things that your church taught you that actually still come up in your mind, and not as a traumatic thing, but like a good thing. For instance, I'm sex positive, but I still hear the words. The Apostle Paul wrote this brilliant phrase. He said, all things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial. And
Mm.
so, whenever I'm about to engage sexually, the question that comes up within me from my conservative background is, I'm allowed to do this, but is this the best thing for me in this moment? And it's
Mm.
like, well, what a gift that came from crazy conservative church. Like those
Right.
little things, include it, bring it with you, and
Yeah.
that will keep you from being entrenched in the demonizing, which I think stalls us on our growth.
Yeah, for sure. That's beautiful. Applying that message of inclusion like across the board.
Yeah,
It's like,
totally.
no, I prefer conditional love and conditional inclusion.
Yep. It's too easy, too easy.
How convenient, right? Like how
Mhm.
how painfully convenient, like this notion and this narrative that says we deserve to be in pain and we deserve this punishment and we deserve this, obviously life is not devoid of pain. There's going to be pain. That's just part of being alive. How much of the Christian narrative do you believe contributes to our propensity to perpetuate our own suffering versus, hey, can we accept the kingdom of heaven is within? Can we accept the here and now? Can we give ourselves the grace and the compassion and the mercy to actually be fully loving, be fully inclusive, be all that we want to be, not put heaven off later, and be done with hell right now?
Yeah. I want your audience to hear me. I want you to hear me. This is something that I've come to in the past few years. I think Christianity, the religion, is the problem. It is a problem. I think the theology that is orthodoxy, what like is considered all Christians must believe to be a Christian, I think that whole system through and through is wrong. It's harmful. And I'm a Christian pastor, so like I really believe that is wrong because from the ground up, it's rooted in the paradigm of fear over love. It's rooted in an idea of God that is a judge, not the father that longs after his children. Um, and so I'm anti-orthodoxy. I'm anti-Christianity in that sense because I've seen how the tradition has become something that is not Christ-like at all. But again, there have always been in these past 2000 years, there's been Christianity up here, which is the institutions, the power, the authority. There have always been those down here that have been marginalized as heretics and false teachers. That if you actually go back, if anybody's actually as nerdy as I am on this stuff and want to look, like Google search the early heretics of the Christian church, read what they were kicked out for. One of the heretics, Pelagius, was kicked out because he said, I believe all humans are fundamentally good, and there's no such thing as original sin, that God created us in God's image, and we are good from the beginning, and goodness can flow from us continually. I believe that. That there was a community of Christians around that guy, and yes, the institution didn't like it because it took away their power. If you can't convince people they're bad and need you, then you don't really have a good way to control them, do you? There's always been these movements of people that are getting to the real heart of the spiritual truth that I think Jesus and many other spiritual teachers embodied. And today, in a vast majority of progressive churches, if you go to gaychurch.net, it's this incredible database of progressive LGBT inclusive churches. If you walk into 90% of them, you're going to find people that resonate with you as a queer person on just about everything and space for you to actually explore, reconstruct, heal, and get back to that message of the kingdom of God is within us. And now let's make that kingdom of God a reality on earth as it is in heaven. It's that outward or inward to outward movement that I think is the heart of my spirituality. It's the heart of what Jesus tried to teach his disciples. And it's being rebirthed in the heart of a lot of Christian churches and denominations in our day.
Mm, that is bringing the cigarette moment full circle, Brandon. That was amazing. A beautiful, beautiful way to end with it is finished and it is just begun. Oh yeah, we're going alpha omega this interview right now, Brandon.
I hope we're not triggering people with all this Bible talk, but
Well, it's good because
yeah,
this is what the work is. It's applying love to your triggers,
yep,
right? Stepping out of the world of judgment,
yep,
period. It's like
yep,
judgment is convenient because guess what? 99% of the people on the planet are doing it. That's why we have the wars, the poverties, the all of the stuff. We're judging, we're determining this fear-based, this scarcity-based. There's not enough. We're not really digging in. We want to project and blame and point fingers, and we don't want to do the internal work. But if
yep,
literally everybody did the internal work of their own triggers and applied love and healing and patience and kindness and mercy and all the things that the Spirit of God actually embodies, if we really embodied that, in Him we live and breathe and have and move our and have our being, right? Like in everything give thanks, for this is the will of God. If we really applied those things, the world would in fact transform
yep.
because I'm taking responsibility for my own dysfunctional bubble. Be like, oh, this bubble sucks. It must be someone else's problem.
Yeah.
No. It's
Yeah.
ours, it's ours, and it's a beautiful bubble. It's an opportunity to expand, which I believe, that's what we're here to do: expand, learn, grow. This is like Earth School. Let's
Yep.
so
Yes.
I feel enlightened, enriched, and educated
Likewise.
already. And so, yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to include all the links for everybody to contact you. And you've got so many amazing things going on for my community, for myself. I mean, I've got friends up in New York as well. So I'm just really looking forward to witnessing your personal expansion as you live life with love, overcoming fear.
Hmm. Well, thank you. And likewise, thanks for inviting me into this important community. And let's keep doing this work. It's
Yeah.
so transformative.
Let's make it rain, baby. Time for the flood of
Yes.
all floods.
I
All
love it.
right. Thank you, sir.